The bread was still warm. Sarah could feel the heat through the cloth as she moved down the corridor, her footsteps soft against the stone floor. She did not carry a torch. She had learned the path by memory weeks ago. 12 steps from the servants' staircase, a left turn at the crumbling arch, then a long, straight walk until the air changed. The dungeon air was different from the rest of the palace. It was heavier, colder. It pressed against her skin, like a warning. She stopped at the iron door. It was massive, twice her height, bolted from the outside with 3 thick locks that only the Lord's personal guards carried keys to. There was a gap at the bottom, roughly the width of her hand. She knelt and placed the bread parcel through it. She did not say anything. She never said anything. She stood, brushed the dust from her knees, and walked back the way she came. That was all. She did this every night. She had been doing it for 9 weeks. Sarah had not always worked in the palace. She had come from a village 2 days' ride from the capital, a place so small it did not appear on most maps. Her mother had made bread for the village baker. Her father had carried stone for the builders who passed through. They were ordinary people living an ordinary life, and that life had suited Sarah just fine. Then, the old lord died. The new one took power, and the tax collectors came 3 times in 1 year instead of 1. The village could not pay. They gave what they had. It was not enough. The collectors returned with guards, and they took everything that was not nailed to the floor. Sarah had watched her mother press her hands together and ask, quietly, if they might leave the children's food. They did not leave the children's food. That winter, Sarah knew what empty felt like. She knew it in her stomach, in her chest, in the back of her throat. She knew the kind of hunger that makes it hard to sleep, that makes you lie awake thinking about a single piece of bread the way other people think about gold. She never forgot it. When a courier passed through the village the following spring, recruiting palace staff, Sarah had signed her name without hesitating. She was 22. She had quick hands. She followed instructions well, and she did not complain. Those were the only qualifications required for a household worker in the lower wing. She had been at the palace for 3 months when she found out about the dungeon. It was not a secret exactly. Everyone in the palace knew someone was locked below. They just did not speak of it openly, the way people do not speak of injuries that have not fully healed. She had overheard a conversation between 2 senior staff members while collecting linens from the upper cupboard. One of them said the name Silen. The other one shushed her immediately, as if the name itself were something dangerous. Sarah did her research quietly. She was good at quiet. What she learned, piece by piece, was this. Calen had been the alpha king of the northern reaches, ruler of 3 provinces, and a man known for keeping the roads safe and the granaries full. The current lord, a man named Aldrich, who had seized power 2 years ago, through a combination of force and strategic betrayal, had not been able to kill Calen outright. Calen had too many people loyal to him across the provinces. Killing him would have started a war that Aldrich was not confident he could win. So instead, Aldrich had locked him in the dungeon and told everyone he had gone into voluntary exile. Almost everyone believed it, or at least pretended to. Sarah had started paying attention to the dungeon when she noticed something that bothered her. The food tray that was meant to go down each evening, the one the junior guards were responsible for, was often returned full. Sometimes it was not even sent. She had seen one of the younger guards dump the tray's contents into the waste bucket and take the tray back down as if it had been delivered. She had stood there for a moment, watching him, saying nothing. That night, she made an extra loaf of bread. She did not plan to make it a habit. She thought she would do it once, feel better about it, and move on. She was not a political person. She had no loyalty to the old king or the new lord. She simply could not walk past someone's hunger without doing something about it. That had been 9 weeks ago. Now she was here every night, and she had not missed a single one. She told herself it was just bread, just a small thing, not brave, not meaningful, just bread. But on the 9th night of the 9th week, something changed. She had placed the parcel through the gap and was already standing to leave when she heard it. Movement close to the door, not the shuffling, distant sound she sometimes caught, but close, deliberate, like someone crossing a room with a specific destination in mind. Then a voice. It was low, roughened by weeks of disuse, probably, but still with something underneath it that was steady and certain, the kind of voice that had been accustomed to being listened to. "Who are you?" 2 words. Just 2. But they landed in the quiet corridor like a stone dropped into still water. Sarah stood very still. She had not prepared for this. She had spent 9 weeks preparing for nothing, for silence, for the routine, for the walk back up the staircase in the dark. She had not prepared for a voice. She should have left. Every sensible part of her said to leave. If she was found here by the wrong person, it would not go well for her. She knew what Aldrich's guards did to people who showed sympathy for the prisoner. She did not leave. She crouched down slowly, bringing herself level with the gap in the door, and she said the only true thing she could think of. Nobody important, she said. Just someone who didn't like the idea of you going hungry. The silence after that was long. She counted her own heartbeats without meaning to. Then he said, "Why?" Not a question, with a rising inflection. A flat word. A word that said, "I have been in this room for 2 years, and I have stopped expecting explanations that make sense. Because I know what hungry feels like," she said, "and it is not something I can walk past." Another silence. Longer this time. She waited. "You could be punished for this," he said finally. "I know," she said. "Then why take the risk?" She thought about it honestly, the way she always tried to think about things. "Because the risk of doing nothing felt worse," she said. "I'm not brave. I'm just not good at pretending I don't see things." The sound from behind the door shifted. She could not see anything through the gap. It was too dark on his side. But she had the distinct impression of someone sitting down, lowering themselves to the floor, drawing close to the door, in the same way she was crouched on her side. "How long?" he asked. 9 weeks, she said. The silence that followed that answer was different from the others. It was not empty. It had weight in it. 9 weeks, he repeated, quietly, as if the number meant something to him, that it did not quite mean to her yet. "I have to go," she said. The guards would rotate soon. She could not be found here. "I'll come back tomorrow." She stood. "Sarah," she said, before she could stop herself. She had not meant to give her name. It came out anyway, like it had made the decision before she did. "My name is Sarah." She did not wait for a response. She walked back up the corridor, through the arch, up the 12 steps, and into the part of the palace where things were ordinary and lit. And behind her, she thought she heard something, not words, just the faint, low sound of a man exhaling slowly, like someone who had been holding their breath for a very long time and had only just now, for the first time, remembered how to let it go. She did not sleep well that night. Not because she was afraid, though there was some of that. Not because she was worried about what came next, though that was there too. She did not sleep because she kept thinking about the way he had said 9 weeks, and the exact quality of the silence that had followed it. It was the silence of someone who had been counting. She had thought she was the only one counting. She had thought she was the one keeping track, marking the nights, making the walks, choosing this every single time she could have chosen not to. But he had been counting too, in the dark, alone, with no way to know who was leaving the bread or why. He had been counting the nights it arrived. She lay in her small room in the lower servants' quarters, staring at the ceiling, and she felt something she did not have an exact name for. It sat between recognition and responsibility, between sympathy and something quieter, something she was not quite ready to examine closely. She turned onto her side and told herself to sleep. Tomorrow night, she would bring bread again. That was all it was. That was all it needed to be, for now. The next morning, Sarah went to work early. She always did. She took her usual route through the kitchen, collected the supply list from the head cook, and spent the first 2 hours of the day doing exactly what she was supposed to do. She did not think about the dungeon. She was very good at not thinking about things when she needed to focus. But once, when she was kneading dough at the long kitchen table, she pressed her palms flat against it and felt the warmth of it, the particular softness of bread that has risen properly, and she thought about a man sitting on a cold stone floor, counting the nights a stranger had chosen to see him. She pressed harder on the dough. She would make it warm tonight. She always made it warm. But tonight she would make sure. That was all she was going to let herself think about it. That was enough. The thing about silence is that it has layers. There is the silence of 2 strangers in a room with nothing to say to each other. There is the silence of people who are comfortable enough that words are not necessary. And there is a third kind, the silence that happens when two people are choosing their words carefully, because they already understand that what is said through this particular door will matter in a way that ordinary conversation does not. Saroa had been sitting on her side of the iron door for 6 minutes on the 58th night, when she realized that she and Kaylin had moved through all three kinds of silence without her noticing it happen. It had started with questions. Careful ones, the kind people ask when they are trying to understand someone without revealing too much of themselves. He had asked her where she was from. She had told him about the village, the baker's shop, the tax collectors, the winter. He had listened without interrupting, which she appreciated more than she could say. She had asked him, once, very carefully, whether he was all right, not politically all right, not all right in the way that was really a question about kingdoms and power, but all right the way a person can fail to be when they are alone in a dark room for too long. He had been quiet for a moment. Then he said, some days more than others. That was the most honest answer she had ever heard from anyone. After that, the conversations had opened up slowly, the way a door opens when the hinges are stiff, with some resistance at first, then more easily, then all at once. He told her about the provinces, not the political geography of them, but the way they looked at different times of year, the northern highlands turning white in the first weeks of winter, the way the river market in the second province smelled like wood smoke and fresh fish in the early morning. He talked about these things the way people talk about something they are afraid of forgetting. She told him about her mother's bread, the exact weight of it, the way the crust sounded when you broke it. She told him about a dog that had lived under the bakery table for 11 years and had died the same week her father got sick, and how she had always thought of the two things together, not because one caused the other, but because loss, she had found, tends to arrive in groups. You think about things carefully, he said once. I have to, she said. I'm not very quick with the big things. I have to turn them over a few times before I understand them. That is not a flaw, he said. That is the only honest way to think. She remembered that one. She wrote it in the back of her mind and kept it there. He never asked her to help him escape. She noticed that in 58 nights of conversation, he had not once asked her for anything beyond what she was already doing. He had not asked her to carry a message, to find out information about the guards' schedules, to contact anyone on the outside. He simply talked to her. He answered her questions. He listened to hers. She was not naive. She understood that a man who had run 3 provinces for years knew how to be strategic, and that asking her nothing was possibly its own kind of strategy, keeping her safe, keeping her motivated to return, keeping the one connection he had to the outside world intact. But she also thought, when she was being honest with herself, that he might simply have meant it, that perhaps 2 years in a cell had stripped something away from him, the part that calculated everything, the part that turned people into pieces on a board, and what was left was someone who actually just wanted to talk to another human being. She hoped it was the second one. She found herself thinking about it during the day more than she used to. She would be counting jars in the pantry, and her mind would wander back to something he had said 3 nights ago, some observation he had made about the way people underestimate quiet people, and she would stand there with a jar of oil in her hand, thinking about it, turning it over the way she turned over all the big things. Her friend Nell, who worked in the upper kitchens, had started giving her a look, a sideways, careful look that said, "You are somewhere else lately, and I am not going to ask about it right now, but I am going to ask eventually." Sarah was not ready for eventually. She did not know what she would say. She could not explain it to Nell, because she could not fully explain it to herself. What was there to explain? She left bread at a door. She had conversations through a gap in an iron wall. Nothing about that was simple or complicated at the same time. The 59th night, she arrived to find he had pushed something back through the gap at the bottom of the door. It was a small stone, smooth, rounded at the edges, the kind you find near a riverbed. She had no idea how he had gotten it. The dungeon floor was cut stone, but perhaps there had been one loose. Or perhaps it had been there all along and he had kept it, the way people keep small things when there is nothing else to keep. She picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. Theme turned it over in her palm. There was no note, no explanation. She did not need one. She put it in her pocket and carried it with her for the rest of the night. On the 62nd night, he told her about the day the coup happened. He did not tell it like a man recounting a defeat. He told it the way you tell a story about a moment that genuinely surprised you, and that was what surprised her most. That a man who had ruled for years, who had built alliances and maintained power, and watched the political landscape the way a navigator watches the sky, had been genuinely surprised. I trusted the wrong person, he said. I knew Aldrich for 11 years. He sat at my table. I had thought... He stopped. I had thought loyalty was something that could not be bought if you treated people well. I believed that, actually. I think that was the real mistake. Do you still believe it? She asked. I believe it about some people, he said. She understood that she was one of the people he meant. She did not say so. Neither did he. Some things did not need to be named to be true. What would you do differently? She asked. I would listen more carefully to the things people do not say, he said. The words are easy to control, but the silences, those are harder to manage. She thought about that for a long time after she went back to bed. She thought about all the silences she had sat in on her side of the door, the comfortable ones, the careful ones, the ones that had weight. She wondered what he heard in them. She wondered what she was saying without meaning to. She wondered if he was doing the same, listening to the things she was not saying, turning them over, trying to understand her the way she was trying to understand him. She decided that probably he was. She found that she did not mind. On the 71st night, she was later than usual. She had been stopped in the corridor by one of Aldrich's senior stewards, a man named Grove, who had the kind of face that seemed designed to make people feel guilty for no particular reason. He had looked at her basket, at the basket again, and asked where she was going at this hour. She told him she was taking scraps to the waste bin in the lower hall. The basket held the bread under a cloth, and the cloth was covered by a folded piece of linen from the laundry. He had looked at her for a long moment, then he stepped aside. She did not breathe properly until she was halfway down the corridor. By the time she reached the door, her hands were shaking slightly. She knelt, placed the parcel through the gap, and pressed her palms flat against the cold floor to stop them trembling. You are later than usual, Kalen said. His voice was right there. He had been at the door already, waiting. I was stopped, she said. It was nothing, Grove, the steward. I told him I was taking scraps out. A pause. Did he believe you? I think so, she said. I am not very remarkable. That helps. You are considerably more remarkable than you think, he said. She did not know what to do with that. She looked at the gap in the door, at the darkness on his side of it, and she felt something in her chest that she was not ready to name. I am fine, she said. I'm here. I know, he said. And then, quietly, I was worried. 2 words. Just 2. But the care in them was so direct, so unguarded, that she had to look away even though there was nothing to look away from. She sat with her back against the door, her knees pulled up, and she told herself to breathe normally. Salen, she said. Yes. How long have you been sitting at the door waiting? A pause. A while, he said. How long is a while? A longer pause. An hour, he said. Perhaps more. She closed her eyes. She had left the kitchen at the usual time. She had been delayed for perhaps 15 minutes by Grove in the corridor. He had been at the door waiting for over an hour. She had thought, in all these weeks, that she was the one who cared more. That she was the one making the effort, the one taking the risk, the one who had turned a small act into a habit, and a habit into something she would not give up without a fight. She had thought he was the one receiving. She saw now that she had been wrong about that, or at least that the picture was not as simple as she had drawn it. He was not just receiving, he was waiting. He had been waiting for her, the way you wait for something that has become necessary, not just wanted, not just appreciated, but woven into the structure of your days, so thoroughly that its absence would leave a hole you could not explain. She was the one who left the bread. He was the one who counted the hours until she did. The lock on his door was made of iron, and bolted from the outside. But there was another kind of lock, she understood now, that had nothing to do with iron, and she was not at all certain which side of it she was on. She stayed longer than usual that night. Neither of them mentioned it. The guards changed rotation at the half hour after midnight. Sarah knew this because she had made it her business to know. In the careful, unhurried way she made it her business to know anything that mattered. She knew which guards talked to each other on their rounds, and which ones walked in private silence. She knew that the one called Finn was afraid of rats and avoided the lower corridor on most nights. She knew that the senior guard, a heavy-set man named Brent, had a habit of checking the cell doors in reverse order whenever he was running behind schedule, which meant the dungeon door was sometimes the last thing he looked at, rather than the first. She had not gathered this information for any particular purpose. She had simply paid attention, as she always paid attention, and filed it away in the part of her mind that kept things in case they were needed. On the 78th night, it was needed. She arrived at the door to find that the bread from the previous night had not been taken. It sat in the gap, still wrapped, cold now. Her stomach dropped. She crouched immediately, pressed close to the door. "Kalen," she said, keeping her voice barely above a breath. "Nothing." She said his name again. Then, after a moment that felt much longer than it was, she heard him, his breathing, uneven, closer than the door, so he was on the floor near it. "I am here," he said. His voice was rough, different. "Are you hurt?" she asked. A pause. "They came this morning," he said. They had questions. It was not a pleasant conversation. She understood what that meant. The new Lord's guards had a particular way of asking questions. She pressed her hand flat against the cold iron door. She had no idea why she did that. The iron did not care. It could not transmit anything, but her hand stayed there anyway. "Can you eat?" she said. "Yes," he said. "Then eat," she said. "And I am going to sit here for a while, if that is all right." "You will be late getting back," he said. "It is not safe." "I know the guard schedule," she said. "I have time." Another silence. Then, "Sarah." "Yes. Why are you still here?" It was the same question he had asked that very first night, in different words. Why take the risk? And she had the same answer, more or less, though it had grown in the weeks between then and now. "Because you have been sitting on that floor alone for 2 years," she said. "And tonight is not going to be a night you sit there by yourself, if I can help it." She heard him exhale, slow, long. "I should tell you to go," he said. "You should," she agreed. He did not tell her to go. She sat with her back against the door, and her hand resting against the iron, and she stayed until the guard rotation was close enough that she had to move. And when she stood to leave, she did not say goodbye, because she never said goodbye, she just said, "Tomorrow." And from behind the door, "Tomorrow." She walked back up the corridor and up the 12 steps, and she did not let herself feel anything complicated until she was in her own room with the door shut. Then she sat on the edge of her bed, and she pressed both hands to her face, and she breathed. She was in very serious trouble. Not the kind with guards and punishments, though that was real enough. The other kind. The kind that had no bars and no iron door, the kind that you walked into on your own 2 feet, over the course of 78 nights without quite noticing, and then one day you looked around and understood that you had been in it for a very long time. She had come down here to leave bread. She had not planned on leaving pieces of herself as well. She thought about the stone in her pocket. She had kept it all this time, transferred it from apron to apron every morning, an irregular weight against her hip. She took it out and held it in her palm. Smooth, heavy, warm from her body now, not cold like the floor it came from. She closed her fingers around it. Tomorrow, she told herself. Always tomorrow. And the day after that, and the one after that. For as long as she had to. The morning Sarah heard what Aldrich planned, it was not from someone she trusted. It was from someone she barely knew. A laundry worker named Bess, who had overheard 2 of Aldrich's personal attendants talking near the drying racks. Bess had not thought much of it. She mentioned it to another worker over the noon meal, more as gossip than as alarm. Sarah was sitting 2 seats away and caught only part of it. She caught enough. She set down her spoon. She excused herself from the table in a voice that she was proud of for how ordinary it sounded, and she walked to the far end of the courtyard, and she stood in the cold morning air, and she thought, execution, dawn, 4 days. Aldrich had stopped worrying about the provinces. Perhaps he had consolidated enough power. Perhaps he had simply decided that the risk of keeping Kalen alive had grown larger than the risk of letting him die and managing whatever came after. The decision had the shape of something that had been building for a while and had finally been made. 4 days. Sarah had, in 78 nights, never thought past the next night. She had never thought about what came after this, what the plan was, how it ended. She had thought about it the way you think about something you know you should think about, but cannot quite bear to yet. She was thinking about it now. She did not panic. She had learned, in her life, that panic was a feeling that moved through you like weather. You could not stop it, but you could wait for it to pass, and the waiting was faster if you kept your hands busy. So she went back to work. She carried linens, she sorted jars, she did everything she was supposed to do, and she let the panic move through her while her hands were occupied. By afternoon, it had passed enough that she could think clearly. She knew 3 things. She knew she could not storm the dungeon alone. She knew she could not bribe the guards because she had nothing to bribe them with, and no reason to believe it would work. She knew that Aldrich's household operated on documentation and procedure. Every movement of goods, every transfer of anything below a certain floor, required a written note with a seal. She knew where Aldrich's seal was kept. Not the main state seal, that was locked with serious security, handled by men she could not reach, but the secondary household seal, the one used for internal transfers, for movement of supplies and staff, for the dozens of small administrative actions that kept a palace running. That seal sat in the records room off the main kitchen, in a wooden box on the 3rd shelf, under the supply ledger. She had returned supplies to that room 40 times. She could find the box with her eyes closed. She also knew that the records keeper, an older man named Otto, went to bed early and left the room unlocked after the evening count was done. He had mentioned once, with mild irritation, that the lock was stiff and he could never get it to catch properly anyway. Sora spent the afternoon composing a document in her head. She had learned to read and write from the village school. Nothing elaborate, but enough. She knew what the internal transfer forms looked like. She had seen them. She had filed them. By evening, she had a plan. It was not a good plan. It was a plan built from everything she had, which was very little, and it relied on a chain of conditions, all being true at once, which plans built from very little usually do. But she had 4 days and no other options. She went to find Nell. Nell was the only person in the palace Sarah trusted with anything that mattered. Not because Nell was bold or strategic. Nell was neither of those things. But because Nell was loyal in the way that truly loyal people are. Quietly, without ceremony, without needing to be asked twice. She told Nell very little. She told her only what Nell needed to know, which was this, that there was someone in this palace being treated unjustly, and that Sarah was going to try to do something about it, and that she needed Nell to cover her absence for one specific window of time in 2 nights. Nell looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "How long a window?" 2 hours, Sarah said. "All right," Nell said. That was it. No questions. No argument. Just, all right. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of tension she had been carrying all day. "Thank you," she said. "You make good bread," Nell said, which was not an answer to anything, but was also, somehow, exactly the right thing to say. The night of the plan was the 80th night. Sarah went to the records room after Otto's last count. The door was unlocked, as expected. She found the seal box on the 3rd shelf, exactly where it always was. She sat at the records table in the dark, and wrote by the light of a single candle. She wrote a transfer order, prisoner transfer, internal, on the authority of the Lord's household for purposes of interview by the Northern Provincial Council, which was a body that technically still existed and had the legal right to request such transfers, under a treaty that Aldrich had been too busy consolidating power to formally dissolve. She did not know if anyone would check the treaty. She suspected no one would. In her experience, people with institutional authority rarely expected documents to be wrong, which made documentation the most powerful tool available to someone who had nothing else. She stamped the form with the household seal. She returned the seal to its box. She folded the paper carefully, tucked it into the front of her apron, and walked out of the records room, as if she had every reason to be there. The next piece required timing. She had spent 2 days studying the guard schedule with new precision. She knew that on the 2nd night after each rotation change, Finn was assigned to the lower corridor and Brent was on the upper floor. Finn, she had observed, could be relied upon to spend the later part of his shift near the staircase rather than at the dungeon door, particularly when the rats were active. The rats were always active near the staircase. She had brought a small amount of grain in her pocket. She scattered it near the staircase before going to the door. She did not feel good about using the rats. She felt practical about it. She knelt at the dungeon door. Her hands were very steady. She was almost surprised by how steady they were. "Calen," she said, "I need you to listen carefully." "I am listening," he said. He was at the door immediately. He had been waiting, as he always was. "I have a transfer document," she said. "I am going to pass it to you now. When the guard comes to do the morning check, you are going to tell him that you have received notification of a provincial interview and that you are to be moved before dawn. He is going to ask to see the document. You show it to him." A long pause. "Sarah," he said. "The seal is real," she said. "The treaty is real. The provincial council still legally exists. The document is written correctly. I spent 2 days making sure." "Where did you get a seal?" he asked. "I borrowed it," she said. "It is already back where it belongs." A pause. Then, quietly, "You forged a transfer order." "I wrote a transfer order," she said, "with a real seal, based on a real legal framework. There is a difference in your mind between those things." "There is," she said. Another silence. Different from the others. She could feel him working through it, calculating, assessing, doing the thing his mind did, which was probably the thing that had made him a good king in the first place. "Where does the transfer go?" he said. "To the northern gate, for the council's escort," she said. "Except that the council's escort is not actually the council's escort." "Then who is it?" "There are 4 men who were part of your former provincial guard. I made contact with one of them 3 days ago through a merchant I trust. I told him what I needed. He is bringing 3 others." The silence this time was very, very long. "You did all of this," Calen said, "in the last 4 days." "I had motivation," she said. "I heard something I was not supposed to hear. They are planning to move up the timeline." "You do not have much time left." She heard his breathing change. He had understood, before she said the direct thing, what the indirect thing meant. She had expected that. "You should have told me," he said. His voice was still steady, but something in it was different. Compressed. "I am telling you now," she said. "And we do not have long tonight. The guard will be back in this corridor in 40 minutes. You need to understand the plan completely before I go." They went through it twice, then 3 times. He asked questions. Good ones. Precise ones. The kind that showed he was thinking about failure points, and not just hoping for the best. She answered all of them. She had thought about the failure points too. When they were done, there was a moment where neither of them said anything. "Sarah," he said. "Yes? If this does not work." "It will work," she said. Not because she was certain, but because she had chosen to be. "If it does not, Calen," she put her palm against the door, "it will work. And when it does, you are going to walk out of here." "And then?" he said. She did not have an answer for that. She had not let herself think past the walking out. Thinking past the walking out was the kind of thing that made her hands shake, and she needed her hands steady. "One step at a time," she said. She stood. She straightened her apron. She was very calm in the way you are calm when you have made a decision, and the time for changing it has passed. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he said. She walked away. At the bottom of the staircase, she scattered the last of the grain, heard the immediate rustle of movement in the dark corners, and climbed upward toward the lit part of the palace without looking back. She had done what she could do. Now the plan would either hold or it would not. She had sealed every gap she could find. The rest was outside her control. She was not good at things being outside her control. But she was learning. She was learning a lot of things lately. The morning after, she waited. Nell covered her absence from the early linen round. Sarah stood at the edge of the upper courtyard, where she could see, at a certain angle, the stone path that led from the lower wing to the northern gate. She had positioned herself with a basket of laundry, which gave her a reason to be standing still. She waited. The morning moved slowly. She was counting, again, this time minutes instead of nights. Then she saw them. 2 guards, walking a figure between them toward the gate. The figure was tall, even at this distance. Even after 2 years in a cell, the way he moved was different from the way the guards moved. He walked like someone who had not forgotten that he used to be the person giving the orders. She pressed her lips together hard. At the gate, there was a brief exchange with a group of men on horseback. She could not hear it. She watched the body language instead. The gate guard stiffened, checked the document, looked at the horseman, looked at the document again. Then they stood aside. Kaylin walked through the gate. Sarah let out the breath she had been holding for what felt like the entire morning. She picked up her basket. She went back to work. She told herself she felt fine. She did not feel fine. She felt as though something had been removed from her chest. Not painfully, but with a finality that left a very specific kind of quiet behind it. She had wanted him to be free. She had chosen this. She had built every piece of it with her own two hands. She was glad. She was also aware, in a way she had not let herself be aware of before, that the dungeon corridor was now empty in both directions. She would not walk to the iron door, that there was no gap to kneel beside, no footsteps approaching from the other side. The stone in her pocket was very heavy. She carried it through the rest of the day, through the noon count and the afternoon clean, through the dinner preparation and the evening distribution, until her shift ended, and she went back to her small room and sat on the edge of her bed. She took the stone out and held it. She told herself the right thing had happened. She believed that. She believed it fully, and without doubt. She also thought about a man who had been counting the nights she came, and she wondered if he was somewhere, right now, counting something else. Or if the counting had stopped, if he had walked through the gate and felt what it was to breathe open air after 2 years of stone walls, and if that feeling had made everything else very small. She hoped it had. She genuinely hoped it. She curled her fingers around the stone, lay down on her side, and let herself feel all of it, the relief and the quiet, and the shape of something she had not quite finished understanding. She was still turning it over. She always was. She would get there. 3 weeks passed. Sarah did her work. She carried linens and sorted jars and made bread every morning, and she did not go to the lower corridor anymore because there was no reason to. The dungeon door had been reassigned to storage. She had heard that in passing from one of the supply workers, said with the complete disinterest of someone who did not know what it had been before. She had been careful, in the weeks since, to show no reaction to anything related to the North. There had been talk, of course, whispers about Aldrich's rage, about a forged document that was being investigated, about the mystery of who had helped the prisoner escape. Grove, the steward, had made pointed inquiries of several lower staff members. He had questioned Sarah once, briefly. She had looked at him with the expression of someone who found the whole business moderately interesting, but not particularly relevant to her work. And she had told him she had heard the same rumors as everyone else and hoped the matter got sorted out. And then she had asked whether she should continue with the summer linen inventory or wait for the new directive from the upper floor. He had dismissed her. She was not very remarkable. It helped, the way it always helped. She had not heard from Kaylin. She had not expected to. The entire point of what she had done was that he would be gone. Somewhere safe. Somewhere outside Aldrich's reach. Somewhere with people who were loyal to him and could begin the work of whatever came next. She had not done it to be part of what came next. She had done it because the alternative was not something she could live with. On the first day of the 4th week, she was in the kitchen before dawn, working the first bread of the morning, when someone walked in. She did not look up immediately. The kitchen had a lot of foot traffic in the early hours. Then something made her look up. She was not sure what it was. A shift in the air, maybe. A quality of the silence. She had gotten very good at reading silences. Kaylin stood in the kitchen doorway. He was different from the image she had carried of him, which was strange because she had never actually seen him. She had only ever heard his voice through a door. She had constructed an image from that voice, from the things he said and the way he said them, and the real version was simultaneously nothing like it and exactly right. He was taller than she had imagined. His face had the particular quality of someone who had been through something long and difficult and had not yet fully finished coming back from it. There was a stillness to him that was not the stillness of someone passive, but the stillness of someone who had learned to be very deliberate. He was looking at her with an expression she could not fully read. She looked at him. She looked at the bread dough on the table in front of her. She looked back at him. She said, "You should not be here." "I know," he said. "Aldrich's people are still asking questions about the transfer." "I know that too," he said. She waited. He crossed the kitchen and sat down on a low stool near the bread table. Not close enough to be intrusive, just close enough to be present. He sat the way he had probably sat on his side of the dungeon door, close to the point of connection, within speaking distance. "I owe you a conversation," he said. "That does not happen through a door." She looked at him for a long moment. The bread dough under her palms was warm. "You risked coming back here," she said. "That was not sensible." "No," he said. "You have people who need you to be sensible." "Also true," he said. "Then why?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, not the uncertain quiet of someone gathering their thoughts, but the deliberate quiet of someone choosing their words with care. "Because you kept account of nights," he said, "and I kept account of nights. And I thought, when this was over, when there was a chance to sit across from each other without iron between us, I wanted to do that. I wanted to say, without a door in the way, that what you did changed something. Not just the obvious thing, that what he canned." She pressed her hands flat on the bread table. "Kaelin," she started. "I am not asking anything of you," he said. "I am not here with a political purpose, or a request, or a claim on your time. I am here because you sat on a stone floor in the dark for months and kept me from going somewhere I could not have come back from. And I wanted you to be able to see my face when I said that." The kitchen was very quiet. The rest of the palace had not woken up yet. It was only the two of them, and the warm smell of uncooked bread, and the early morning dark outside the window. She looked at him. She looked at his face, the real one, the one she had never seen. She thought about 9 weeks of bread and 12 steps, and the particular weight of a smooth stone from a river that she had carried in her pocket every day for months. She reached into her apron pocket. She set the stone on the table between them. He looked at it, then he looked at her. "I have been carrying that since the night you pushed it through the gap," she said. "I did not know why. I think I know now." He picked it up. He held it the way she had held it, carefully, with his whole palm, the way you hold something that has been kept rather than just possessed. "There is a great deal of work ahead," he said, "reclaiming what was taken, rebuilding what was damaged. It is going to take time, and it is not going to be simple." "I know," she said. "I would like, when it is less dangerous than it is right now, to continue this conversation," he said. "The one we started through a door, in a place where there are no doors." She held his gaze. She thought about the counting, the hours he had sat waiting at the iron door while she was held up in a corridor, the way he had said 9 weeks, quietly, like a man reciting something sacred. She had been the one leaving bread. She had not understood, until she did, that he was the one who had been feeding her too, not with bread, but with the kind of conversation that makes you feel like the version of yourself you actually want to be. "All right," she said. It was the same word Nell had used. Simple. Without ceremony. It was, she thought, exactly the right word. He stood. He placed the stone back on the table between them, with a care that meant he intended to leave it there. With her, as he had intended it all along. "I will find a way to reach you," he said, "when it is safe." "I will be here," she said. "I am not very difficult to find." "No," he said. And for the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not a full smile, but the direction of one. The beginning of it. The suggestion that there was a version of this face that smiled, and that she might, in time, see it. "You are exactly where you always are." He walked back to the kitchen doorway. He stopped there for a moment without turning around. "Sarah," he said. "Yes. Thank you for the bread." She looked at the table. At the dough under her hands, already warm from the work. "Thank you for eating it," she said. He left. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, alone, hands on the bread. Then she began to knead. The morning was coming. There was work to do. There was bread to make and linens to sort, and a palace full of people who would need feeding before the sun was fully up. She pressed her palms into the dough and felt the warmth of it, and thought about a man walking out of a gate in the early morning light, 3 weeks ago, finally breathing open air. She thought about a conversation that had started through a door and was not, she understood now, finished. She was not very quick with the big things. She had to turn them over a few times before she understood them. She was turning this one over. She thought she was beginning to understand it. She shaped the first loaf with careful hands, set it aside to rest, and started on the next one. Outside the kitchen window, the sky was getting lighter. It was going to be a clear day.